In the late afternoon of a warm 2004 day, Mr. M received a call from his wife. She had been complaining to him about the strange behavior of the cattle and even the dogs, how they refused to go near the woods. They refused to go near the tree line. Something had them spooked. So shortly after arriving home, Mr. M sees for himself the odd behavior of his animals. Concerned, he calls a friend. Both men arm themselves. He has a pistol and his friend has the shotgun. They decide to take the frontage road and go on a patrol. They were thinking perhaps it may have been a coyote or a bear, some known predator. But this would be the night that they would never forget. After checking their weapons, Mr. M and his friend had decided that they were well armed enough against any predator they would come across. Having been satisfied with this, they decided to hop aboard the giant ATV and proceed down the dirt road on their patrol. At about 30 minutes into the ride down the dirt road, the men spotted something suspicious in the tree line. In the interview, Mr. M recalled smiling to himself and thinking this would be an easy night, easy solution, no big deal, probably just a coyote. But boy, was he wrong. At a distance of about 20 feet, the men came to a stop. They spotted movement near the big tree. It almost looked like a huge paw resting on the tree trunk. They couldn't be sure, but they thought initially it could be a bear. Wanting to get more light on the situation, Mr. M grabbed his 1,000,000 candle-watt spotlight and shined it at the tree. What they saw almost froze their soul. Nothing in these men's life could have prepared them for this moment. It was indescribable. This thing, this creature, something they'd never seen before, right out of some kind of Hollywood nightmare, stood right before them. The half-dog, half-man creature glowered at the men as they stood in shock and awe and total disbelief. The creature was indescribably huge. The creature stepped from behind the trees. Mr. M estimated the height to be at least 8 feet. Its body was heavily muscled. The legs were dog-like and also heavily muscled. The creature was a physical specimen of unbridled power, extremely frightening to witness and behold. What could the two men do against something so menacing? The Dogman glowered aggressively, its malevolent intent and intelligence apparent in its eyes. And suddenly, Dogman began to approach the men. In subsequent interviews, Mr. M said it felt like an eternity. It was almost like slow motion as the creature approached them. The men were fearing for their life. However, thinking fast, Mr. M's friend who brought the shotgun raised it and fired 2 heavy slug rounds at the oncoming creature. Astonishingly, the Dogman did not die. It was hurt and bloodied, but still standing. The men were in shock and disbelief. Any other predator would have died from that range, from that heavy caliber of ammunition. Now, the men were faced with a choice: fight or flight, stay or die. They made the choice that was easiest and obvious. Adrenaline kicked in, and in seconds, Mr. M and his friend hopped in the ATV, turned around, and were headed back out at top speed. At first, the men were relieved. After all, the ATV was capable of 40 miles per hour. Surely they would have no more problems now. But in a moment, the men both screamed as they realized Dogman was running next to the ATV at 40 miles per hour. Mr. M recalled that he couldn't believe how fast this thing could move. And suddenly, Dogman leaped ahead of the fleeing men. Mr. M had to hit the brakes hard to keep from slamming into the massive creature. Its big, massive hands slammed down on the front of the ATV. Now the men were stopped. They were trapped. They felt despair. Dogman growled at the men. Mr. M recalled feeling as though they would die right then and there. He thought about his family, how the news reports would account of how they found their bodies twisted, broken, bleeding, or perhaps not find their bodies at all. The situation was dire. Both men knew they had to do something. But what? What could they possibly do? In an amazing moment of clarity, Mr. M's friend thought quickly once more. He remembered that he hurt Dogman before. Perhaps he could hurt him again. He aimed his shotgun. He was less than 10 feet away. However, seeing this, Dogman leaped clear just as the shot rang out. In the interview, Mr. M recalled after arriving home and his friend went to check on his family, he knew that it would be difficult to relay what had happened to his wife. So he waited until his children had went to bed, and he told his wife of 25 years the horrifying events that they witnessed that same night. He had never seen her that afraid, but she believed him. Mr. M was an honest man and not prone to lies and fantastic stories. So they both decided that it would be a good idea to call the sheriff, who was a personal friend of theirs and partly Native American Indian. He had hoped somehow that the sheriff would believe him. So the very next afternoon, the sheriff arrived. Interestingly, after talking to the sheriff for about an hour, Mr. M was relieved to know that not only did the sheriff believe him, but the sheriff knew what the creature was. It was called a Dogman. And the sheriff said that he knew of someone or some people who could perhaps help, and he would get in contact with them immediately. Shortly after lunch, a special operations or spec ops black team arrived. The American flag patch on their shoulders reassured Mr. M. The men asked Mr. M about his Dogman encounter after they arrived. Refusing to go into the woods, Mr. M just showed them on the map where the encounter had happened. That was good enough for those men as they proceeded off into the wilderness, helicopters flying above. After several hours, machine gun fire could be heard in the woods off in the distance. Not long after that, a military cargo helicopter was seen hovering over the woods in the area of the gunshots. The Spec Ops commander, after returning, only gives Mr. M vague reassuring statements that he was safe now. Mr. M took it with a grain of salt, as he recalled in the interview. For a few nights, there was peace and quiet. The nights were uneventful. But just as Mr. M thought that his nightmare was over, he realized it was only just beginning as the Dogmen returned. More than one of them, perhaps. Nightly torments, the livestock. Mr. M and his family just continued, night after night after night after night. Finally, what convinced them to leave, as these nightly torments grew bolder, were the huge scratch marks on the side of the house. They had had enough. After all, they had the safety of their children to think about. The Dogman had won. It was difficult. Mr. M had worked hard to get his 200-acre farm. Now he would have to give all that up. But he was okay with that. He loved his family, and they were more important. They had picked a place to move to, and after having made arrangements with the real estate agent, the family packed up and moved out. Although they would be forever traumatized by what they had just experienced. This would probably follow them for life. But with distance came some relief, leaving the situation behind and moving to a new location. For good reason, Mr. M wouldn't give his exact location. He only hinted at moving to a big city in the Northwest. And to this day, as far as I know, Mr. M refused to go into the wilderness. Thanks for watching, guys. I want to give a special shout out to my friend Rick Ridiculous. Check out Rick Ridiculous. He has a great channel, very funny stuff. Cool guy. And my other friend Fog360 Bushcraft. Both amazing gentlemen. As always, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe if you haven't done so, and double check your notification settings as YouTube has made some changes. Take care of each other and have a great night.